Most people think movie stars just look pretty and read lines. But what if I told you that one of Hollywood's biggest icons invented technology that powers your Wi-Fi? Bluetooth and GPS today, and the US military rejected it because she was too beautiful to be taken seriously. This is the story of Hedy Lamarr. And no, you probably don't know her name unless you're really into old movies or you've stumbled across some random tech article. But here's the thing. This woman wasn't just a face on a screen. She was a genius who escaped the Nazis, outsmarted arms dealers, and created a patent that would change the world. But when she tried to give it to the US Navy during World War II, they told her to go sell war bonds instead. Because apparently, a pretty face can't possibly understand radio frequencies. Let me take you back to the beginning. Vienna, Austria, 1914. Hedy Lamarr was born as Hedwig Eva Maria Kiesler. Her father was a bank director. Her mother was a pianist. And little Hedy? She was curious about everything. Not in the cute way kids are curious, in the way that actually annoyed people. She would take apart music boxes just to see how they worked. She'd ask her father endless questions about how streetcars moved, how elevators knew which floor to stop at, how telephones carried voices through wires. Her dad didn't shut her down. He encouraged it. He'd walk with her through the streets of Vienna and explain the mechanics of everything around them. Tramways, printing presses, factory machines. This wasn't normal for girls back then. Most were taught to be quiet, sit still, look pretty, maybe learn piano. But Hedy's brain was wired differently. She wanted to understand how the world worked, not just exist in it. By the time she was a teenager, she was stunning. Like, stop traffic, kind of beautiful. And in Vienna in the 1920s, that meant something. The city was a hub of art, culture, and film. So it wasn't long before someone noticed her and said, "Hey, you should be in movies." And she was. At 16, she dropped out of school and started acting. Small roles at first, then bigger ones. And then, in 1933, she starred in a film called Ecstasy. And that film made her infamous. Not famous. Infamous. Because it had a nude scene. Not just any nude scene. It was one of the first in mainstream cinema. There was also a scene that suggested an orgasm. People lost their minds. The Pope condemned it. Governments banned it. But everyone wanted to see it. And suddenly, Hedy Kiesler was known everywhere. But not for her brain, for her body. That same year, she met a man named Friedrich Mandl. He was one of the richest men in Austria, an arms dealer. He sold weapons and ammunition to anyone who would pay. Fascists, Nazis, whoever had money. Hedy was 18. He was in his 30s. And he was obsessed with her. Not in a romantic way, in a possessive way. He wanted to own her. So he convinced her to marry him. And she did. Maybe she thought it would give her stability. Maybe she thought she loved him. But whatever the reason, it was a mistake. Friedrich Mandl was a controlling nightmare. He tried to buy up every copy of Ecstasy so no one could see his wife naked on screen. He didn't let her go out alone. He didn't let her have friends. He didn't let her act. She was a prisoner in a mansion. But here's where it gets interesting. Mandl held business dinners at their home. And at these dinners, he talked shop. He talked about weapons technology, torpedoes, radio-controlled bombs, artillery systems, and the problems with them. See, back in the 1930s, radio-controlled weapons were a new idea. You could theoretically guide a torpedo to a target using radio signals. But there was a massive problem. The enemy could jam the signal. They could intercept it. They could block it. And if they did that, your million-dollar torpedo was useless. So Mandl and his guests would sit around talking about how to solve this. And Hedy would sit there, silent, listening, absorbing, learning. They didn't think she understood. They thought she was just a pretty decoration. But she understood every word. In 1937, Hedy decided she'd had enough. She wanted out, but leaving wasn't simple. Mandl watched her constantly. So she came up with a plan. One night, she drugged her maid, put on the maid's clothes, and walked right out the door. She fled to London. She left everything behind. Her money, her jewelry, her life. But she took her brain with her. And that was all she needed. In London, she met Louis B. Mayer, the head of MGM, one of the biggest movie studios in the world. He saw her and immediately wanted to sign her. But he didn't like her name. Hedwig Kiesler sounded too German, too foreign. So he renamed her Hedy Lamarr, after a silent film star named Barbara Lamar. And just like that, she became someone new. She sailed to America. And when she arrived in Hollywood, she became a star. A real one this time. She was cast in Algiers in 1938, and audiences fell in love with her. She was in huge films: Boomtown, Tortilla Flat, Samson and Delilah. She was one of the most famous women in the world. But here's the thing. She was bored. Acting wasn't enough for her. It never had been. She'd spend her days on set, saying her lines, hitting her marks. And then she'd go home to her house in Los Angeles and she'd go to her room. Not to rest, to invent. She had a drafting table, tools, books on engineering and physics. She would spend hours working on ideas. She invented a tablet that dissolved in water to make a carbonated drink. She designed a new kind of traffic light. She even improved the design of airplane wings. Howard Hughes, the aviation tycoon, was a friend of hers. He once showed her his planes and said he wanted them to go faster. So Hedy studied birds and fish, how their bodies moved through air and water, and she sketched new wing designs for him. Hughes looked at her drawings and said she was a genius. But still, no one took her seriously. She was a movie star. What did she know? Then World War II started, and Hedy couldn't ignore it. She'd seen the Nazis rise to power. She'd fled Austria because of them, and now they were destroying Europe. She wanted to help, but how? She couldn't fight. She wasn't a soldier, but she had something else. An idea, a big one. She'd been thinking about those dinners back in Vienna, about radio-controlled torpedoes, about jamming, about the problem no one could solve. And she thought, what if you didn't use just one frequency? What if you used many? What if the signal jumped from frequency to frequency so fast that the enemy couldn't keep up? They couldn't jam what they couldn't predict. It was brilliant. But she couldn't build it alone, so she reached out to a friend, George Antheil. He was a composer, an avant-garde musician known for his experimental work. He'd written a piece called Ballet Mécanique that used 16 synchronized player pianos. And that's what gave Hedy the idea. If you could synchronize pianos, you could synchronize radio frequencies. She and George started working together. They met at her house. They sketched diagrams. They argued about math. They tested ideas. And eventually, they figured it out. They called it frequency hopping. The transmitter and the receiver would both have identical rotating drums like the ones in player pianos. These drums would tell the signal which frequency to jump to next. Both sides would be in sync. The signal would hop across 88 different frequencies, just like the 88 keys on a piano. The enemy wouldn't be able to jam it. They wouldn't even be able to follow it. In 1941, Hedy and George filed for a patent. U.S. Patent 2,292,337, Secret Communication System. They didn't want money for it. They wanted to give it to the U.S. Navy. They wanted to help win the war. So they submitted it. And the Navy looked at it. And you know what they said? They said no. They said it was too bulky, too complicated. They said it would never work. But the real reason? They didn't take her seriously. She was a woman. She was a movie star. How could she possibly understand military technology? One officer even told her that if she wanted to help the war effort, she should use her beauty to sell war bonds. Not her brain, her beauty. So that's what she did. She went on tour. She sold millions of dollars in war bonds. She kissed soldiers for donations. She smiled for photos. And her invention sat in a file somewhere, ignored. But here's the thing about good ideas. They don't die. In the 1950s, the US military took another look at the patent. The Cold War was heating up. Technology was advancing. And suddenly, frequency hopping didn't seem so crazy anymore. The Navy started using it, but they didn't tell Hedy. They didn't pay her. They didn't credit her. The patent had expired by then, so it was public domain. Anyone could use it. And they did. The military put it in secure communications during the Cuban Missile Crisis. They used it in Vietnam. But Hedy didn't know. She thought her idea had died in a drawer. Decades passed. Hedy kept acting for a while, but her career slowed down. Hollywood didn't want older women. They wanted young faces. So she faded out of the spotlight. She lived quietly. She didn't talk much about her past. Most people forgot about her. And the ones who remembered only knew her as the beautiful actress from old movies. They had no idea what she'd invented. Then, in the 1990s, something changed. The tech world started to boom. Computers, cell phones, wireless communication. And engineers started tracing the history of the technology they were using. And they found something. They found Hedy's patent. They realized that frequency hopping was the foundation of modern wireless communication, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, all of it traced back to the idea that Hedy Lamarr and George Antheil came up with in 1941. People started writing about it. Articles came out. Tech companies started talking about her. And finally, in 1997, Hedy Lamarr was given an award. The Electronic Frontier Foundation gave her the Pioneer Award. She was 83 years old. She didn't attend the ceremony. She was too private by then. But she sent a note. And in it, she said it was about time. 3 years later, she passed away. She died in the year 2000 in Florida, alone in her home. She never made a cent from her invention. She never got the recognition she deserved when it mattered. But today, every time you connect to Wi-Fi, every time you use Bluetooth, every time your phone finds your location, you're using her idea. You're using the technology that the military said was too feminine to work. Let's talk about why this matters. Because it's not just about Hedy Lamarr. It's about how we treat people who don't fit the box we put them in. Hedy was a woman. She was beautiful. She was an actress. And because of that, people assumed she couldn't be smart. They assumed she couldn't understand science or engineering. They assumed her value was in how she looked, not how she thought. And that assumption cost the world years of progress. Imagine if the Navy had taken her seriously in 1941. Imagine if they'd used frequency hopping during World War II. How many lives could have been saved? How much faster could the war have ended? We'll never know. Because they didn't listen, and this still happens today. People get put in boxes. You're a woman, so you must not be good at math. You're an artist, so you must not understand business. You're young, so you must not know what you're talking about. You're old, so you must be out of touch. We do this constantly. We see someone and we make assumptions based on how they look, what they do, where they come from. And we miss out on brilliance because of it. Hedy Lamarr is proof of that. But let's go deeper into the technical side of what she invented, because it's genuinely fascinating. Frequency hopping is also called frequency hopping spread spectrum, or FHSS. The basic idea is this. Normally, when you send a radio signal, you pick one frequency and you broadcast on it, like tuning into a specific station on the radio. The problem is, if someone else knows what frequency you're using, they can interfere with it. They can jam it. They can block it. They can listen in. That's a huge problem in military communication. You don't want the enemy to intercept your orders or disable your weapons. So Hedy's solution was to not use just one frequency. Instead, the transmitter and receiver would rapidly switch between many different frequencies in a pattern that only they knew. It's like having a conversation where you and your friend keep changing languages mid-sentence, but you both know the order of the languages. Anyone listening in would just hear nonsense. They'd catch a syllable in English, then a word in Spanish, then something in German, and they'd have no idea what you're saying. That's frequency hopping. To make this work, Hedy and George used a mechanism based on player pianos. In a player piano, A roll of paper with holes punched in it tells the piano which keys to press and when. The paper roll rotates, and as it does, the holes line up with different keys. Hedy and George took that concept and applied it to radio frequencies. They designed a system where both the transmitter and the receiver had identical slotted rolls. As the rolls rotated, they would tell the radio which frequency to jump to next. Both sides would be perfectly synchronized, hopping through 88 frequencies in the same order. To an outsider, the signal would seem random. But to the receiver, it was perfectly clear. Genius, right? But here's the thing. In 1941, this was hard to build. The technology wasn't quite there yet. You needed precise synchronization. You needed mechanical parts that could move fast enough. You needed radios that could switch frequencies in milliseconds. It was doable, but it was expensive and complicated. And the Navy looked at it and said, "Nah, too hard." But they were wrong. It wasn't too hard. It just required someone to actually try. And by the time they did try, years later, the technology had caught up. Transistors replaced mechanical parts. Electronics got smaller and faster. And suddenly, frequency hopping wasn't just possible. It was practical. Today, frequency hopping is everywhere. Your Wi-Fi router uses it. Your Bluetooth headphones use it. Military drones use it. Secure government communication uses it. Every single GPS satellite uses it. It's one of the foundational technologies of the modern world. And it came from the mind of a woman who was told she was too pretty to understand science. Now let's talk about Hedy's life after the patent. Because it wasn't easy. She kept acting through the 1940s and 50s, but Hollywood is brutal to women as they age. Roles dried up. Offers stopped coming. By the 1960s, she'd mostly retired. She lived in seclusion. She was married 6 times, and none of the marriages lasted. She had 3 children, but her relationships with them were complicated. She struggled with loneliness. She struggled with her identity. For so long, she'd been told that her value was in her beauty. And as she got older, that beauty faded. So what was left? She didn't know. She'd never been recognized for her mind, only her face. And when her face was no longer what people wanted, she felt worthless. She had some legal troubles too. In 1966, she was arrested for shoplifting. The charges were eventually dropped, but it made headlines. People mocked her. They said she was crazy. They said she was washed up. It was cruel. This woman had invented technology that would change the world, and people were laughing at her. She became a recluse. She stopped going out. She stopped doing interviews. She stayed in her house and avoided the world. For decades, she was forgotten. But then the tech world found her. In the 1990s, as I mentioned, engineers and historians started connecting the dots. They realized that this old Hollywood actress had invented something incredible. And they started reaching out. Journalists wanted to interview her. Tech companies wanted to honor her. But Hedy was in her 80s by then. She was frail. She was private. She didn't want the attention. But she agreed to a few interviews over the phone. And in those interviews, you can hear the pain in her voice. She talks about how nobody listened to her. How she tried to help and was turned away. How she spent her whole life being seen as a body, not a brain. But you can also hear pride. She knew what she'd done. She knew it mattered. And she was glad that people were finally paying attention. In 1997, she received that Pioneer Award from the Electronic Frontier Foundation. It was a big deal. The tech community was finally acknowledging her. But she didn't go to the ceremony. She was too old, too tired, too private. But she sent a message. And in it, she said something like, "It's about time." Those 3 words said everything. Decades of frustration. Decades of being ignored. And finally, recognition. But it came too late. She died 3 years later. She never got to see just how big her invention would become. She never got to see a world where everyone carries a device in their pocket that uses her technology. She never got paid for it. She never got rich from it. She just got a couple of awards at the end of her life, and then she was gone. But her legacy didn't die. Today, Hedy Lamarr is celebrated. There are documentaries about her, books, articles. She's been inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. She has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, but not for inventing, for acting, which is kind of ironic. But still, people know her name now, not just as an actress, as an inventor, as a genius, as a woman who was ahead of her time and paid the price for it. And here's what really gets me. Hedy didn't invent frequency hopping because she wanted fame or money. She did it because she wanted to help. World War II was raging. People were dying, and she had an idea that could save lives. So she worked on it. She didn't have a lab. She didn't have a team of engineers. She just had her brain, a composer friend, and a drafting table in her bedroom. And she figured it out. And when she tried to give it away for free, she was rejected. Not because the idea was bad, but because of who she was. That's the tragedy. That's the injustice, and that's why her story matters. Let's also talk about George Antheil for a moment, because he deserves credit too. George was a fascinating guy. He was a pianist and composer, and he was known for doing weird, experimental stuff. His ballet Mechanic was this chaotic piece that used airplane propellers, sirens, and 16-player pianos all at once. It was loud, it was wild. People either loved it or hated it. But it showed that George understood synchronization. He understood how to make multiple machines work together in perfect timing. And that's exactly what Hedy needed. She had the idea for frequency hopping, but she needed a way to synchronize the transmitter and receiver. And George said, "What about player pianos?" And that was the missing piece. The two of them worked together and they came up with something incredible, but George faced some of the same dismissal that Hedy did. He was a musician. What did he know about military technology? So even though his name was on the patent, he didn't get much recognition either. It wasn't until decades later that people realized what they'd done. The patent itself is a fascinating document. If you look it up, you can read it. It's very technical. There are diagrams of the slotted rolls, the transmission system, the synchronization mechanism. It's clear that Hedy and George put a lot of thought into this. They weren't just throwing ideas at the wall, they worked out the details. They figured out how to make it actually function. And yet, it was ignored. The US Navy filed it away and forgot about it. And it wasn't until the technology caught up that people realized the patent was gold. What's also interesting is that Hedy wasn't the only woman inventing things in secret during this time. There were other women, other brilliant minds, who were ignored or sidelined because of their gender. Women who worked on early computers but never got credit. Women who made breakthroughs in medicine but had their male colleagues take the glory. Women who designed critical technology for the war effort but were told to go back to the kitchen. History is full of these stories. Hedy's is just one of them, but it's an important one because it's so clear-cut. She invented something, she patented it, she tried to give it to the military, they said no, and then they used it anyway, decades later, without ever acknowledging her. It's infuriating, but it's also a reminder that progress doesn't happen in a straight line. Sometimes the best ideas are ignored because they come from the wrong person, and it takes years, sometimes decades, for people to realize their mistake. Hedy's story also raises questions about how we value different kinds of intelligence. She wasn't a trained engineer. She didn't have a degree in physics or electrical engineering. She was self-taught. She learned by listening, by reading, by experimenting. And yet, she came up with an idea that stumped the experts. That's because intelligence isn't just about formal education. It's about curiosity. It's about creativity. It's about seeing connections that other people miss. Hedy had all of that. But because she didn't fit the mold of what an inventor was supposed to look like, she was dismissed. And that's a loss for everyone. Imagine if we lived in a world where people were judged by their ideas, not their appearance. Where a movie star could also be a scientist. Where a composer could also be an engineer. Where people were encouraged to explore all their interests, not just the ones that fit their job title. We'd have so much more innovation, so many more breakthroughs, because the best ideas don't come from people who think inside the box. They come from people who don't even see the box, people like Hedy Lamarr. And here's the other thing. Hedy's invention wasn't just a fluke, it wasn't a one-time thing. She was constantly inventing. The carbonated drink tablet, the traffic light, the airplane wings. She had notebooks full of ideas. Most of them never went anywhere. But that's how invention works. You have 100 ideas, and maybe one of them changes the world. Hedy had that one. And if people had taken her seriously, who knows what else she could have accomplished? Maybe she would have invented something even bigger. Maybe she would have inspired other women to pursue science and engineering. Maybe the world would be a different place. But we'll never know, because she was told to stay in her lane, to be pretty and quiet and let the men handle the thinking. But she didn't. She kept inventing. She kept thinking, even when no one was listening. And that's the lesson here. You don't need permission to be curious. You don't need permission to create. You don't need permission to try. Hedy didn't ask for permission. She just did it, and even though the world didn't recognize her for most of her life, her work speaks for itself. Every Wi-Fi signal, every Bluetooth connection, every GPS ping, that's Hedy Lamarr, that's her legacy, and no one can take that away. So what can we learn from all this? First, don't underestimate people. Ever. That person you think isn't smart enough, isn't qualified enough, isn't serious enough. They might be sitting on the idea that changes everything. Second, diversity matters, not just for fairness, but for progress. If the Navy had had more women in decision-making roles, maybe they would have taken Hedy seriously. If the tech world had been more open to outsiders, maybe her invention would have been used sooner. Homogeneous groups miss things. They have blind spots. Diverse groups see more, think more, create more. Third, your value isn't in how you look or what people expect from you. It's in what you do. Hedy knew that. Even when the world told her otherwise, she knew her brain mattered more than her face. And she was right. And finally, it's never too late to be recognized. Hedy didn't get her due until she was in her 80s, but she got it, and today millions of people know her name. Not because she was beautiful, but because she was brilliant. That's the ending she deserved, and it's a reminder that history has a way of correcting itself. It takes time, it takes effort. But the truth comes out eventually. The people who were ignored get their moment. The ideas that were dismissed get their day. Justice is slow, but it's real. So the next time you connect to Wi-Fi, think about Hedy Lamarr. Think about the woman who escaped the Nazis, outsmarted arms dealers, and invented the future in her spare time. Think about the woman who was told she was too pretty to understand science and then proved everyone wrong. Think about the woman who gave her invention to her country for free and was thanked by being told to go sell war bonds. And think about the fact that she did it anyway. She kept creating, she kept thinking, she kept being brilliant, even when no one was watching. That's heroism. That's genius. That's Hedy Lamarr. Her story isn't just a cool historical footnote, it's a mirror. It shows us how we treat people who don't fit our expectations, how we waste talent because of prejudice, how we miss opportunities because of assumptions. And it challenges us to do better, to listen more, to judge less, to see people for who they really are, not who we think they should be. Because if we do that, we might just find the next Hedy Lamarr. The next person with an idea that changes the world. And this time, maybe we'll actually listen. Subscribe for more stories you never learned in school.